It's my great pleasure to welcome today Lama Palden Drolma. Lama Palden Drolma is the founder and spiritual director of Sukhasiddhi Foundation and a co-founder of the Feminine Wisdom School. She completed the traditional Tibetan three-year retreat under the previous Kalu Rinpoche's guidance in 1985. And in 1986, she became one of the first Western women to be authorized as a Lama in the Vajrayana tradition. In addition to Kalu Rinpoche, Lama Palden Drolma has studied with many of the great Tibetan masters from all lineages, including the 16th Gyalwang Karmapa, Taisitu Rinpoche, Boka Rinpoche, Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, Daisen Rinpoche, Dudjom Rinpoche, and the Dalai Lama. And Lama Palden was profiled in Shambhala Sun magazine as one of the women changing the face of Buddhism. So a big welcome today. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us, Lama Palden Drolma.
Oh, my pleasure.
So actually, I'd love to begin by asking you about the term Lama that you were given. Here at Osli Monastery, it seems like being a monk, whether you're a local from the Himalayas or even a Western monk, you might be called Lama. But we so rarely hear women or nuns being referred to with this title. Could you say a few words about who gave you this title and what that means?
Yes, it was given to me following my 3-year retreat by my root teacher, Kala Rinpoche, previous Kala Rinpoche. And he was the first one, actually, he was the first one to give 3-year retreats for Tibetans after they fled Tibet, in India. And he also had a retreat center in Bhutan. But then he also then became the first one to put Westerners into 3-year retreat. And he started this back in the early 70s. And then, as you know, when I went in, it was 1982. But then he felt that if Westerners, and including women, went through the training, and in the Kagyu tradition, the 3-year retreat really is essentially the training for a Lama. I had no idea. I never thought about being a teacher. I just wanted to practice. So I had no idea about it. It was a surprise to me. But when he came to where I was living at the time in Palo Alto, about a year after my retreat was done, then he announced to the audience that I was a Lama. So, really, I think he was hoping that some of us would teach. And
Wonderful, wonderful. And being given this title of changing the face of Buddhism, um, uh, could you say a few words about what it is your activity? What you said you didn't really anticipate teaching, but clearly you've done great things to be given that to refer to in that way.
well, yeah, once he had given me the title, I wasn't sure whether I'd use it or not. And then I decided that because of women being so shortchanged all these centuries and being in the background and held back, that it would be good if I did use it. And it was also Kala Rinpoche's way of empowering Westerners. I mean, it was radical to even give the men a Lama name that were Westerners. It was radical to give any of the Westerners the title Lama, and then, the women on top of it even more. But, I taught when people asked me to teach, following the years after a 3-year retreat. And then I began to have a feeling that I really wanted the lineage of Kala Rinpoche and the stream of blessings of his teachings that he'd given in the San Francisco Bay Area, for that to be able to really continue. And eventually I decided to start a Dharma center and to really allow Kala Rinpoche's teachings to fully keep streaming. And since he was the holder of the Shampa lineage and then a Karmakagyu lineage holder, I trained people in both of those traditions. Primarily, it turned out in the Shampa, but we had practices from the Kagyu as well. And so, it was really under the inspiration of Rinpoche that I started the center, and he had already passed on at that point, but I talked to it about with his successor, Bokar Rinpoche.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So could you tell us a little bit, as you know, we're studying Tilopa's Ganges Mahamudra, so sort of coming in a little bit towards the Mahamudra, could you tell us a bit about your history with these practices, how you first encountered Mahamudra?
Yeah, I first encountered Mahamudra with Kala Rinpoche, and we didn't really realize it at the time because we didn't know anything, but he was always teaching us Mahamudra. He was such a Mahamudra master. He was very famous for that, as well as for being a master of the 6 yogas. But his whole emanation was like Mahamudra. And so, unbeknownst to me, I was receiving a lot of Mahamudra teachings from him. I studied with him in Darjeeling in his monastery there in Sonada, and studied with other teachers in the Himalayas too. I never really studied at a center in America, which is probably why I was able to start one, because I wasn't tired of Dharma centers. So that was my first encounter. And then, of course, during our 3-year retreat empowerments, the empowerments before going in, he gave us pointing out instructions, and that then later I started studying more intensely for myself. Of course, in 3-year retreat, we studied Mahamudra and everything, but at that point, I still was not really very clear on what it all was. I knew something intellectually, but it wasn't until after retreat, when I really started studying later, that Mahamudra started falling into place. And that was through Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, and just re-exposing myself to what we had been taught in 3-year retreat, but starting it all over fresh. So Mahamudra is really a great love of mine, and I feel very happy and joyful when I think about it.
Could you maybe share a little bit about what it is that you find so intriguing about Mahamudra and the pointing out instructions?
I think what it really is that to me is so amazing about Mahamudra is that, many Buddhist traditions have teachings or some kind of realization that's similar to Mahamudra. But what's really unusual about Mahamudra is that there's very, very explicit Vipassana instructions, the Latong as it's called in Tibetan. So there's inquiry questions in Mahamudra that, if you do them in the way that is prescribed, they really are amazing at bringing realization. And I found that to be very unusual. In fact, one of my friends who's a Zen master said he thinks they're the lost instructions of Zen. And he actually, studied with me and some other Mahamudra teachers. But so it's really the Vipassana inquiry questions of Mahamudra that are so amazing when students engage in them. And also, it's been really delightful to see some of my students have realization, and to, of course, not only that, but to have such deep connection with the Dharma through all the various different practices that we do at Sukhasiddhi.
Mhm. It's interesting that you say, you know, you can see this sort of similarity between Zen. I was looking through your bio, and you know, you as a very at a very young age, you studied Zen, Sufism, I believe many different religions. Can you see kind of similarities between the Mahamudra approach and these other spiritual traditions, or not really?
I think the Mahamudra approach is quite unique, but I think where it's all heading, you know, to realize the nature of mind, to understand what is the essential reality of all that is, the nature of reality, the nature of mind. That, of course, you know, not only Buddhist traditions, but I think, you know, in some of the Hindu traditions and, you know, Taoism, etc., they're also going after that. And in the theistic traditions, you know, they're going toward divine union. And, you know, that is quite a different approach from the Buddhist approach. But I've done a lot of interfaith work over the years. I've had the pleasure of, you know, because interfaith has been a interest of mine since I was a child and studying in different religions. And to me, they're all like different flowers in the garden that have their own fragrance and smell. But it's so much richer that we have this garden of all these different various spiritual traditions than just having a garden with one kind of flower, you know. So I appreciate the other traditions. And I think what I was going to say was that when I've been in these interspiritual gatherings and, you know, closely prayed and meditated together and talked with people from all kinds of various traditions, we find so much in common, so much more, even though the methods are different, there's so much common understanding and common, you know, joy that comes from pursuing these various traditions.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think as Westerners, we probably come with a more rounded experience or more rounded understanding of the variety of different approaches and different sort of insights. And yet at the same time, we have this very structured, step by step practices that come through the Tibetan tradition.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
it's really, it's not only my experience, but I've heard this from students as well, that the Vajrayana practices, as well as the Mahamudra teachings and step-by-step approach, unlock all the religions. Like through doing Vajrayana practice and Mahamudra practice, there's this experience of being able to have a deep understanding of other traditions as well. And
Yeah,
this is
very
maybe why the Benedictine monks asked Dalai Lama to comment on the Gospels. I don't know if you've seen that book, but there was a book put out on his teachings, and they asked him to teach them on the Gospels, and he said, "Why? And you know, why should I teach you on the Gospels? That's your field, and you know, I'm an outsider and I don't know anything." And they said, "No, no, we'd really, really love to hear what you have to say." So he did. And there's a book that you can read about that. And I think that's an illustration of how the Tibetan Buddhist teachings and practices, when you really practice in depth, it opens up other traditions as well, because you can, there's something that tunes you to being able to understand the deeper underlying wisdom of that tradition.
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Could you say a few words about how Mahamudra Shamatha, the sort of significance of Mahamudra Shamatha as a prerequisite to the Vipassana practices, and
Well,
your experience of that with teaching your students?
oh yeah. Well, shamatha is absolutely essential. One cannot do the Vipassana Mahamudra. And if you hear the teachings, the inquiry questions in Mahamudra, without shamatha, it'll just seem like nonsense. Like people will not understand it at all. Without shamatha, there is no way to actually truly engage in the Vipassana practices. It's completely essential. So I've seen this, year after year after year with students. And so we always start any kind of Mahamudra practice session by trying to anchor in shamatha. And that's not just like, you've done it at one time before, but you have to actually anchor your shamatha every single time in order to be able to then do the gazing practice. And I know that some of the Dzogchen teachers have taught it a little bit differently, but I think it comes down to the same thing in the end, that you can't really do the gazing of Mahamudra or Dzogchen without shamatha. Your mind is jumping around and it won't be able to actually see through to the nature of reality or the nature of mind.
Could you say a little bit more about this term, the gazing?
Well, the Vipassana of Mahamudra, as well as this is something done in Dzogchen, uses this, what's called gazing at. So the inquiry is not a mental thing. It's a awareness practice where through a stabilized shamatha, then one gazes at certain things that are asked in the inquiry questions of Vipassana. And that gazing is gazing at our direct experience in various ways, our thought experience, our sense experience, any aspect of our experience, that then through gazing at that and being asked certain questions, that's when the insight from the Vipassana arises, and the insight into what Mahamudra really is, and seeing through into the true nature. That's the very, very skillful means and methods for producing insight.
And having learned and studied with so many great masters and doing the really rigorous 3-year retreat, do you feel like the way that you present these teachings to your students, or the way that even that your students hear these teachings in the West, is it quite different to what you experienced when you received these instructions?
Oh, well, I always try to just allow the pure stream of Dharma to come through me. But of course, the vehicle that it's coming through, it's going to be different. And, like being myself, a Western woman, I have all kinds of sensibilities of growing up in the West and being a woman and what that feels like. And so one would hope that the essence all comes through exactly the same, but I think the particulars are going to be somewhat different. I mean, Kala Rinpoche said to us one time, many, many, many years, over 40 years ago, he said that he and the other, lamas like him were planting seeds in the West and getting things going, but that it would really require Western teachers to teach Westerners, because we understand the mind of the Westerners. So that was very interesting that he said that way back in the very beginning. He had way more confidence in us than we had in ourselves, I think, at least speaking for myself. You know, he had a huge amount more confidence in me than I had in myself, that's for sure. So I think he knew the Dharma was going to work its magic,
I know, Lama Palden, you've also explored dohas quite a lot with your students. And I think in the West, we have a very broad appreciation of music. We really have access to such a range of genre. How do you find that singing the dohas lands with your students?
Oh, well, we love singing the dohas. And of course, we're extremely fortunate that we have these dohas, these songs of realization, that we have these passed all these centuries down from great masters, and then we were very fortunate that Khenpo Tsultrim Gyaltsen Rinpoche, he said that, and of course, the huge bulk of what we have is from Milarepa in our tradition, but there's other ones that we have from other great masters too. But he said Milarepa had sung his dohas in colloquial language and to colloquial tunes. So he said that we should sing them in colloquial tunes and that they should be translated colloquially. And I think this was a huge gift because he worked very, very closely with his translators, and he worked with a whole lot of different translators, but there were specific ones that were translating in the dohas, and he really worked with them to understand the meaning. So from his extremely learned and realized perspective, he was able to make sure that while these were being translated colloquial, that the meaning was extremely, accurately revealed through the English words. And so this was just a huge gift. And to sing really goes into the psyche and the mind in a very different way. Like, I love to recite the aspiration prayer for Mahamudra. I love to recite the Tilopa Sangha Naropa, the Ganges Mahamudra, many of these that are not set to music that I love to recite them, but then the dohas from Milarepa and some of the other masters that Khenpo Tsultrim had put together, when you sing them, first of all, it brings so much joy to the heart to sing. And then when you're singing these words of awakening, it really is incredibly joyful. So we love doing that at my center. And actually, this has been one of the sad things from COVID, because since we've been online with almost everything, and we're not able to sing in person together because you can't really sing on Zoom. We do, like, I'll lead something and everybody's singing in their own house, but you can't hear each other. So that's been a sadness of COVID, because we enjoy singing so much, and they do really penetrate. The meaning penetrates in a different way. In a certain sense, it goes through the intellect, but it goes into the intellect in a whole different way. It goes into the heart as well simultaneously. And it's just a different experience from simply reading or reciting. So I'm really, really grateful that we've had these dohas and that Khenpo Tsultrim taught us to sing them in these funny colloquial tunes and everything.
We just had the Kagi Monlam here at Tergar Osling, and a couple of thousand monastics came all the way up this tiny narrow hill to get up here, and in the new Gompa that's just been built. But it's incredible to have a couple of thousand people together chanting, and these songs of incredible depth, incredible meaning. It really awakens the heart in such a different way.
Yeah, and just a few lines of the Doha will be in a huge entire Mahamudra Dzogchen teaching, just, or a whole through the different levels of the philosophy, it'll touch through, Milarepa will just touch through all the levels of philosophy in a very short Doha. And it's just amazing what's packed in there in terms of instruction and teaching.
Yeah. It must be incredible to have that level of realization and to be able to sing it. That must be such a joy, such a joy. Maybe one day. So are there any particular dohas that you resonate with, that you enjoy the most?
Oh, there's so many. There's really so many, because Khenpo Tsultrim gave us a whole book. I mean, the two that I mentioned that I recite, those are the two, the Aspiration Prayer Mahamudra from the Karmapa and Rangjung Dorje, and then no way, was it third or ninth Karmapa, the Aspiration Prayer for Mahamudra? I think it was third.
Ninth. Oh,
Third
I was going to say
I
ninth.
think. I think so.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
and then Tilopa's song to Naropa, the Ganges Mahamudra. Those two are my favorite, but we don't sing those. Among all the ones the singing, there's just so many that, and not only Milarepa, but from this Drupa Kagyu master called Gotsangpa. He had some great songs, and we have a beautiful one from Guru Rinpoche that was part of his last instructions to his disciples that Khenpo Sultram had made into a song. You know, he just took a certain passage and had somebody put it to a tune. So there's just so many that yeah, it's a treasure trove for sure.
And why do you think this particular song, the Ganges Mahamudra, why do you think that that is such a all-time classic?
I think because I don't really speak Tibetan, but the language as it comes across, even in English, and I know that it's just exquisite in Tibetan. And so it's extremely poetical, and the language is so beautiful and so filled with rich image. And it's all of the Mahamudra teachings are all right in that one song. As the same for the aspiration prayer of Mahamudra, that all the teachings of Mahamudra are also in that song. So that's why I think both of those are really extraordinary. But I think that the Tilopa one, the language is just, both of them have beautiful language, but it's so inspiring.
Sort of just changing lines of inquiry here. When we start to see these practices sort of really taking root, you know, we could be singing a song and yeah, we feel like we're really touching into what those words are pointing towards. How do we actually see that in our practice? How do we know when the practice is really starting to come in?
You know, I think, at least for me, it came in very, very gradually in waves, sort of. But then eventually there really are those aha moments where everything starts to click and one begins to understand a lot of different teachings, you know, and especially, you know, Mahamudra teachings, Dzogchen teachings, you know, they just begin to fall into place. And I think that we can trust our intuition, I think, of the teachings. Like, I think people that are drawn to the Dharma are drawn for a certain reason. There's something about it that resonates with us, either intellectually or in the heart or both. And that resonance then, as we hear further teachings, because the Dharma embodies such deep truth, I think that's why it resonates so deeply with so many people. And even people who, it's completely bizarre to be somebody from America or Europe or South America or wherever, Africa, and be studying Vajrayana Buddhism. You know, it's completely bizarre, but I think why so many people have been drawn to it is this deep, deep resonance. And I think that is something that in our heart and minds, we just know when things are the truth. There's a part of us that just knows this is true, this is real. And even if we don't understand it in the beginning, of course, there's much that we don't understand, and it takes years of practice and study before really, you know, it all starts to really fall into place and we understand much more. But there's still that knowingness is there, that Dharma is telling the truth, and that there's deep truths that are being communicated, you know.
And could you say a few words about the difference, particularly with like Mahamudra, the difference between your sort of formal practice on the cushion and then the informal practice as you go into the flow of life. I know you're a mother, and founding an organization must have been a huge amount of responsibility and work. How do you, as a very sincere and very dedicated practitioner, how do you balance these two, your formal practice and a very deep practice, and yet being in the world, so much activity?
I think it's a constant balancing act. My koan for this life has been the intersection of absolute and relative truth. That's really been the biggest koan of my life, like always looking at that from all different angles. And in each moment, how does all that come together? And of course, on the cushion, it's much easier in a sense. And then going through life, I just find that I just stop and just rest in the view as much as possible. If I forget, it's a question of remembering, like remembering to rest in the view when one is driving or walking or doing dishes or, answering emails, talking to a friend, so it's a process of remembering again and again. Once we know how to rest in the view, once we've been trained and or at least to the best that we can do, whatever that is, then I think just moment to moment, trying to remember to rest in that way. And really, I also pray a lot to my root guru and to Tara and to Sukhasiddhi and all the, lamas of the lineage, etc., the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, etc. So myself too, like I integrate a lot of prayer in my daily life, like just taking a walk or doing things, like I'll do mantras and pray. And mantras are also a way that I really integrate a lot in daily life, doing mantra practice while doing other things or just while sitting. So I think it's a lifelong pursuit to fully integrate, our seated on the cushion practice with daily life, and to bring those to the point, hopefully eventually where they're not different.
Would Mahamudra be a practice that you would turn to if you're experiencing something really quite challenging? Do you think it's
Oh,
an access?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mahamudra has been what's helped me the most when push really comes to shove, when I'm in a very difficult or painful or challenging situation in my life. Really resting with the situation, really facing it, and of course having a lot of compassion, but completely facing whatever the situation is, taking responsibility, and then resting in emptiness, completely co-emergent with whatever the emotions are that are happening. It has been extremely powerful for me, and fortunately or unfortunately, it seems like a lot of our best learning happens through adversity as human beings. So I've certainly found that really working with Mahamudra when I've been in these extremely challenging times, or and very emotionally triggered and stuff, has just been completely transformational. So it's very practical in that sense.
Yeah. How could you describe a little bit about the relationship between Mahamudra and, say, Lojong, or the Paramitas, or Bodhicitta? How does Mahamudra relate to these other quite different approaches or practices?
Well, as is done in the tradition, all of the practices of bodhicitta and loving kindness, and of course conduct, and the paramitas, etc., huge body of practices, people training them really usually before they're taught Mahamudra. I think, and then in a sense, there's an organic integration that happens that way because you're so steeped in bodhicitta and so steeped in the loving kindness practices and the paramitas that there's a way where it kind of, integrates by itself once you get to Mahamudra. But I think for people who are going first doing Mahamudra or Dzogchen and then bringing in more of the bodhisattva path, like the Lojong, the mind training, and the loving kindness and all the other things we were mentioning. One time, I think Soni Rinpoche said that that's like the moisture for Rigpa. That's how he was putting it. That's the moisture. Everything is completely dry without loving kindness, without bodhicitta. So whatever way we come to it, somehow we have to keep opening both to love and to emptiness simultaneously. And realize that it's in the union of the two where our practice really comes together and really bears fruit.
Could you say a few words about the correlation between devotion and Mahamudra? How these two work together?
Well, that's really interesting because obviously from Mahamudra viewpoint, from the absolute point of view, we're not separate from our teacher. We're not separate from anything. And yet we're human beings. We have to eat food. We have to go to sleep. We do all these things in the relative world. And the human part of us, I think this is why Vajrayana is so brilliant in the teacher-student relationship, because relationship is so key to us as human beings. And to be able to find somebody that you really cherish as a teacher is such an amazing gift. It's so precious. So for me, I feel like Kala Rinpoche, and even though he passed away, a long time ago now, I still feel him present with me. And I feel like that is the most precious relationship of my life. And, I have huge devotion to him, while simultaneously I could be resting in Mahamudra and still have huge devotion to my teacher, even though, ultimately we're not separate, and all of that. But I'm so grateful that he appeared in this form and taught and, came to the West and had trust in us that we were able to receive these profound teachings. And, when he first started all this, none of the other lamas were going so deep with Westerners, and they thought he was really going off the track. They thought it was completely not a great idea. So he was one of the first that really trusted to Westerners to be able to receive these really profound teachings. Anyway, so I have tremendous gratitude, and I feel like the devotion and Mahamudra, it's the dance of the ultimate and the relative coming together.
And what advice? I imagine you have students over there who don't really have much of a interaction with a Rinpoche. I would. How
Right,
do you
right.
encourage them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really teach in the name of, previous Kala Rinpoche and of 16th Karmapa, of the previous Karmapa. And I'm obviously not even anywhere in the ballpark of their realization. I'm like a little baby compared to a great master. And so it's not really appropriate for my students to have that same kind of devotion that I have for them, for me, and yet what has happened in our center, which I think has been really healthy, is that, and some people come and have, Rinpoches that are already their teachers, but they're getting more the nuts and bolts, from me or from the other teachers at Sukhasiddhi. But I'm more like a spiritual friend, and the teachers that teach at Sukhasiddhi, where I see us more as spiritual friends and Kalyana Mitras, and we're kind of all in it together. And so what's opened up that's beautiful is that they've been able to really make connections with the lineage beings. And, when they do have an opportunity, to study with great lamas, then people, take that opportunity. And, I've tried to invite whoever I could, especially in our own lineage, to Sukhasiddhi, or take people, to see those people, to share a bling or different places. Because it's really nice, even if you can't study with one of the really high teachers on a consistent daily basis or anything like that, just to receive transmission is very powerful. And, and to have a certain body of teachings or some empowerments or things like that, that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, we have some students here who've just completed in the middle of a 3-month course at the Tergar Institute, and it's such a joy to see how much Mingyur Rinpoche is really enjoying their dedication to the practice. They're all really, really, so dedicated, and you can see the joy on Rinpoche's faces, that so rejoicing. And it's so wonderful for the monks here to see how much Mingyur Rinpoche really appreciates the Western Sangha, and it feels like we are, like it feels so perfect. It's a whole Sangha, laymen, laywomen, monks, nuns. It just feels very rich, very full, and very, very complete. It's very beautiful.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm sure it brings a lot of happiness to Rinpoche. Yeah, there's so many people who are so sincere in their practice. And I think that's the thing about the West, because it's not our culture. So if you're not into it, you're not into it. If you're into it, there's a reason you're into it. And so many people bring so much sincerity to their Dharma study and practice that it's really beautiful.
So would you have any words of advice for our students in Tergar who are following the Ganges Mahamudra? I mean, obviously, we have Mingyur Rinpoche teaching, so I know you wouldn't feel it's your place to sort of add to his teachings, but from your unique perspective as a Western woman who's really dedicated a life to the Dharma, what words of advice would you have for our participants, our community?
Well, first of all, to really appreciate that they have Mingyur Rinpoche with them and that they're able to study with him. I think that can't be overemphasized, what a precious opportunity that is to have him to study with. And, since 8 of my teachers have passed away, I really treasure so much the time I had with him, but it doesn't last forever. And luckily he's young, but the students have him now, and it's just such an incredibly precious opportunity. And then to really try to listen to the teachings with a lot of love and appreciation, really valuing how profound and precious they are. Even, as I said, it takes years to really begin to understand them more for most people, unless you're really kind of an advanced kind of person. But so even if you're not really understanding that much or whatever, just to hold them as profound and precious, and something, really, it's true what they say, they are an exquisite jewel. It is like finding a jewel. It's really true. So just to approach listening with just a lot of love and appreciation and just open mind, it doesn't, and not to be frustrated if that you don't understand. It's just the nature, they're so profound that it does take years, and then things along the way click into place, and even in the very beginning certain things click into place. So just to really value the whole process.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I remember when I was so new to the Dharma, and I had the good fortune of spending quite a bit of time with just Kunsang Palmo at her nunnery, just as a volunteer, helping in all kinds of ways. And I would beat myself up so badly because my mind was absolutely all over the place. And here I was with sort of access to this incredible teacher, and I was so hard on myself that I didn't have good questions. My practice wasn't much better than it was, and feel like I could really make the most of that opportunity. But I think, as you said, just being open to and appreciating so much of what we do receive, regardless of where we're at, whatever we're getting is such a blessing.
And I think self-love, loving kindness to the self is super, super important on the path of Dharma. And luckily, when I was about 22, my mom thought it might be good if I went to therapy, and I went, and I had this great therapist for a little while. And one day, as I was walking out of the room, she said to me, "What about self-love?" And this is like 50 years ago, and that became a koan for me. I was like, self-love, what is that? What is that? And it became like this koan. And I felt really fortunate that I had really worked with that when I came into 3-year retreat, because that is like the best situation for beating yourself up for not being a good practitioner, because the standards that of, like, for example, Kala Rinpoche, how he was in his long retreats, many, many years of retreats. I mean, there was no way in a million years we were going to live up to his example. So I was really glad that I had cultivated loving kindness for myself. And I think it's really essential on the Dharma path, because otherwise then we can beat ourselves up, which is very counterproductive.
Wonderful. So, any last words or anything that you'd like to share with us as we come towards
I think
the end
I,
of our
I
time?
think I just said it in terms of what you were asking about advice for the students, to really just appreciate this tremendous opportunity that they have with Mingyur Rinpoche, and to really open to it and listen. And whether, as I said before, whether it all makes sense or not right now, it will eventually with practice.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your lifetime of practice. Your students are very lucky to have you at Sukhasiddhi Foundation, and rejoicing in everything that you're doing there. And thank you once again for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and for the opportunity.